Welcome back, folks. It is Steel City Roundtable time again. First off, I want to apologize. I took a couple weeks off because I got married. I found some broad that's so dumb that she decided that I was the kind of guy she wanted to spend the rest of her life with, and I really fooled her, so she has no clue. But yeah, got married on Monday, and things are going great, so I've been doing stuff around the house, but we are going to start this with some fireworks today. I have a great guest, a very interesting man on today, a gentleman I met through TikTok when it actually did its algorithm correctly and hooked up to people that have similar interests. He is 10,000 days sober today. So holy shit, folks, this is Tom KAMINSKY.
Hey guys, this is LA Tommy Gay. And yeah, 10,000 days today. We met on TikTok, and first of all, congrats on the wedding. That's awesome
Thank
stuff.
Thank you,
I,
sir.
I've been married a long time, and there's nothing like it when it works. Nothing like it.
Yeah, and I mean, I am joking. She's very smart. She's smarter than me, but I had to put it out there because everybody who knows me knows that I'm kind of a big dummy. So they're probably wondering if maybe she's got some type of mental deficit that she chose to marry me. But anyway, we'll get past that. But life is great. Tommy, why don't you tell people about you, who you are, where you are, and what you're about?
Well, right now I'm residing in Southern California, West Hollywood to be specific. I'm from the East Coast. Grew up in Philly, went to school in Boston, uh, raised a family there. And that's where kind of the scene of the crime was, Philly and Boston. Hey, listen, I was a young kid, grew up in the 70s with sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And it was pretty normal for my friends to, go to the creek and drink some Boone's Farm and Ripples, some of that real good stuff. And, it just progressed, right? You're a young guy, you're with your buddies and you're smoking a little pot, you're drinking a little booze, and, but at some point, my friends went right and I went left. And so started the journey down every rung of the ladder until I was looking up at an ant's ass. And it was not a pretty place to be. I mean, my progression of the addicted personality led me to shooting heroin at some point.
Well,
And
let's back up before you get too deep into that because that's interesting in itself. But we have a couple things in common. One, you're from Philly. I was born in Allentown.
sweet.
40 minutes away, 45 minutes away. I also drank Boone's Farm when I first started drinking. And Thunderbird 2020, Thunderbird and Mad Dog 2020, you know what I mean? Like the
Oh,
best of the
yeah.
best. So, not only are we an East Coast, West Coast connection, which seems to be the way this show goes. A lot of the people I meet are on the East Coast.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's awesome to hear that, like, 10,000 days apart. I mean, I'm just over 2 years, right? And you meet people through social media, and this is when it works. This is when it works, when the algorithms work and it pairs people together that have similar interests and similar things to talk about. So, I appreciate you for coming out here today, and I appreciate Philadelphia more than Boston and more than Southern California. But still,
Hey, I'm still a Philly fan all the way, baby.
I mean, you're loud. But so, like you were saying, you started, your friends went left, you went right, looking up an ant's ass, and then you started doing heroin. How did you progress to heroin?
Well, actually, my friends went right. I went left. And, I mean, it was like, look, like I said, I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and, you know, we experimented. My father died when I was really young. I was 5 years old. And, there was three of us kids and, just a single mom, and she had to work and raise her kids. But what that did was it gave me a curse. And the curse was that I had the luxury of time. Nobody was looking after me. And, we got into bad stuff. And it started pretty mildly, no real addiction issues, but I guess it was always there because, I wanted to keep trying stuff. I wanted to get higher. I wanted to get more booze in my system. One was not enough. And I just kept experimenting. And so the Boone's Farm and the Budweiser and the Ripple turned into pot, turned into hash, turned into psychedelics, turned into, uppers and downers and quaaludes, and it didn't matter what it was. I just wanted to be out of where I was. And I had fun. Hey, don't get me wrong. I mean, like in our early days, dropping LSD and doing Quaaludes and seeing the Grateful Dead, that was just a blast. But, you know, I guess I was a little chunky when I was younger and I started snorting meth. And then, the guy that I got it from, he shot me up. Then I did it myself. And I did that for a couple of years and, until there was none around. And then I turned to heroin, so that addictive personality just kept going. And it got so bad, like back in the day, there was no needle programs. I would go behind veterinarian clinics, take needles out of a trash can, sharpen them on a matchbook, burn them thinking I'm sterilizing them, and, shoot up. And I'll tell you, I won't tell you right this second, but years later, I paid the price for the wreckage of my past. But, so it went. And, eventually I got off the hard stuff. And um, honestly, I went to a Grateful Dead concert and like people were like hugging each other and having a good time. And it was like away from the cutthroat of trying to cop heroin or meth. And like, that's a tough crowd, especially in the streets of Philadelphia. It's a really tough crowd.
Well, being
But
an ex-cop, you know what I mean? Being an ex-cop, like I dealt with that a lot. That was a big portion of my career. And, you know, as a human, you feel sorry. You
yeah,
feel bad for the people that are struggling like that. But as a cop, you had to put on that face like, listen, you're doing something wrong right now. That's what I have to focus on. But I want to go back to something. Your progression through your substances to heroin, like that's insane, right? Like that's not a 2-day journey. That's years and years of working, excuse me, from one thing to another. Why did you start drinking or using in the first place? What was your motivation? Whether it was conscious or subconscious, what were the reasons behind? Because for people like me, it was like, lack of self-esteem and I felt like I didn't fit in, blah, 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 blah. You know, what was it for you
I don't
that
think it.
caused you to drink?
I don't think it's any different. When you grow up without a father, you are different. Your
Hmm.
family's different, your friends are different, everything is different. And from a very young age, we were different. And we were the poor people. We didn't have things. And like, I was just moved in from, different cities. We were born, Niagara Falls, New York, and lived in Toronto and Niagara Falls, where my father's family was, and then we started moving around to different cities. So you meet different friends. And we eventually landed up in Philadelphia, where my mother was from. And I always felt like the kid who was left out. And that's just where it was. And like, I don't think, I didn't start using till I was probably, 14, 15 years old, but it went real quick after that. I was always the kid that was on the outside looking in. And once, I started using, things changed. I was with the in crowd. I was one of the cool guys, and then like I went to a high school in Philadelphia where there was 5,500 kids in our high school. There was only 200 of us that were white, and we would supply the drugs. Everybody liked us. We were the good guys. And that's just kind of the life that we led. And we just, like I said, it was because I just never fit in. So once I started using, I fit in and it
Now,
felt good.
ironically enough, you just said that you were born in Niagara Falls.
Yes, sir.
I just got home yesterday from work. I was staying in Grand Island, New York, right across the bridge.
Oh,
So this is just kind of this is the shit that I find funny in life. Like literally, I was just up fighting with a little Indian guy at the counter at the Holiday Inn Express up there the other day because I booked a hotel online and they told me I didn't have a room when I got there. So I had to sit there for 3 hours after working 14 hours just to get it.
Oh.
Anyway, long story short, that's going to be another whole episode in itself. So, hey, Holiday Inn Express, you suck. I'm coming for you. But, I literally like Philadelphia. And then I was just like miles from where you were born. That's kind of cool to me. That just shows that the world's a crazy fucking place. But I sidetrack a lot. This is
Hey,
just
listen, this is cool because the crazy thing is, I literally was just in Niagara Falls last week. I did a post on my TikTok channel about the power of recovery was like the falls behind me, but I was in Niagara Falls because I was in Toronto. And this is the crazy thing, right? My father was a professional athlete and he died very young, but he coached in the Ontario Hockey League, and there is a trophy named after my dad for the best defenseman in the Ontario Hockey League. And last week, I was at the Hockey Hall of Fame in Toronto giving it out to the recipient. And let me tell you something, if I wasn't in recovery, I wouldn't be invited to things like that.
yeah. So back to your story, you finally found that group that you fit in with, right? You
Oh, yeah.
finally found, as I like to say it, my people. My people
Yeah,
are drunks and my people are drunks, alcoholics, and drug addicts, and
totally.
people with mental health issues. So why don't you tell us a little bit more? So you're how old are you when you hit heroin?
16.
16. So it took you approximately a year and a half, 2 years to get bored with everything else out there under the sun that could make you feel good. You got bored in 2 years.
2 years. That's all it took.
So physically, what was that progression like on your body? I mean, that's like jumping in front of an Amtrak.
Yeah, well, like I said, when I was younger, 13, 14 years old, I was chubby. And my initial goal was if I did meth, I got skinnier.
So
And
the
that,
gym was never a thought.
not a thought. And
Wow.
I played ice hockey. Yeah, I played ice hockey, my entire life, and drugs and alcohol took it away from me. I was one of the best kids that come out of Philadelphia, and drugs and alcohol took it all away from me. And I even after I got, I even like as we are type A personalities, I even played collegiate hockey at a very high level, but I was able to separate, the booze and the drugs from the athletic season, but that's longer, many years later. But,
Mhm.
initially I wanted to get thin and I started doing meth and then I started shooting meth. And then when there was no meth around, I started shooting heroin.
Well, it's
And
interesting with the hockey how you formed a lifestyle. Like
yeah,
we all do it. As a truck driver, I compartmentalize my alcoholism. I planned my day around how I could get my booze and how long I can drink. So I can't. It must have been very, very difficult playing a contact sport on, quarter-inch blades, and half the time probably being a little bumped up. You know what I mean? A little off center. No pun intended. Um, but like it must have been really hard to balance things out. But like it's an interesting point because we all do that. We all have this second person inside of us that is the planner, that is the task manager.
it's amazing what we as alcoholics and drug addicts are able to accomplish no matter what. And, it was like, I think that, the hard stuff really didn't come in till probably I was 16 and 17 years old. But, I was playing hockey 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16. So there was definitely a little bit of an overlap there. But like as I got deeper into it, my hockey skills and career kind of like took a little bit of a back seat. And
Mhm.
I had the luxury when I was younger, like we used to work at a hockey rink. So we would stay there all night and like I'd be doing eight balls and like just having a grand old time. And then like I said, the key here is there was really no parental supervision. You
Yeah.
know, I think when you give a young kid the luxury of time, with no controls whatsoever. And look, God bless my mother. She did the best she could, but like, she just had to support her kids, and we just were able to run rampant. So I had a lot of time.
And I mean, an important thing to remember, folks, is that like Tom, I had a lot of fun drinking. Like I had a shit ton of fun. But you know what? It was fun until it wasn't fun anymore.
Right.
And I think we can both agree on that, that there's select moments in our lives as addicts that we are given a blatant choice of whether we want to continue on the path we're on or whether we want to change it up a bit and take the harder, darker, rough road. And like most addicts, it sounds like, Tom, you chose the wrong one a few times.
Sure did. And the crazy thing is, no, in spite of the addiction and, the hard stuff went away by, probably 18 years old, but, I still did lots of drugs and booze. It was always about that. But in spite of that, I matriculated through college, I got a degree, I, worked for companies, and I wound up opening up my own business and had a really thriving business for many, many years. And I'm still working at that business, although it's very different than it was back in the day. But I think that just goes to show that you hear people with addiction, are these type A, very successful, driven people, and once they stop the drugs and the alcohol, they're able to really be, really add to society instead of taking from society. And trust me, you know, I took a lot. I was a liar. I was a cheater. I stole. I was just a fine young citizen from Philadelphia. And, we used to go to Atlantic City, and I would literally, and I'm not proud of this, but it's part of my story. I would literally sit on the beach, watch for families to go in the ocean, and then I would just steal their stuff because there was nothing they could do.
I mean,
And
like you
like,
said, you're an entrepreneur. You know what I
but
mean? Like a
it,
street
it
entrepreneur.
no question, but it goes to show you the that you lose your moral compass when the addiction of the disease enters your life, and you have no perspective. You don't care about anybody except feeding the machine. And, left on the streets, that's where we were. So that's the bad stuff.
Okay, so during your addiction progression, were you like me where I had a good job, I had a nice car, I had a decent place to live, I wasn't suffering monetarily, right? Like I wasn't broke, but I was a lot more uh, constricted in my spending because of my alcoholism, right? Like the 20 or $30,000 a year I spent drinking, I couldn't use to do things. I couldn't use to save to buy a house. I couldn't use to, pay off my car. Were you like that, or were you the opposite, where you basically lost everything and had to build back up from scratch? Because I think there's only really I haven't seen too many in the middle type of people. It's either usually one or the other, right? We're either completely in denial and we think we have a good life, or we know shit is shit and we just keep going. You know?
I think it was actually a combination of both, and like, I was able to, like after college, I, was able to hold on to a job. I wound up getting married when I was very young, and that's where things really hit bottom, because she wound up leaving me 3 years into the marriage because of drugs and alcohol. And she was straight before I met her, and she got addicted to quaaludes, and like, it was just a mess, and each year progressed. But that's where the bottom really kind of happened for me, because I was broke, I was left in debt, and she drove away in the car that we owned together with all the stuff, and I was left with all the bills, and I had to work 3 jobs to kind of get myself out of it at a pretty young age. I must have been 20, 22 years old at the time, and it was really, really hard. But like, and I was still using, you know still using.
Yeah. So you said bottom. So I'm assuming you're talking rock bottom because that's what we all talk about, right?
Yeah.
There's this lady that has a website called inspiringsobriety.com. She sells t-shirts. This is one of them. She has one, and I mention this on almost every episode. It says, I didn't know rock bottom had a basement. And the reason I bring that up is because a lot of us say we hit rock bottom, but we haven't actually hit rock bottom.
Yeah.
You know, we've hit the basement floor, but there's levels below that that we're willing to go to before we decide to make a change. For me, it was wanting to kill myself. Like that was like my 10th rock bottom. But that
Uh-huh.
was deeper than any other one I'd ever been in. So for you, was it one specific incident or time frame, or did you have several different moments where you were like, listen, this is as low as I can go, I have to do something? Or was it just one time?
Well, I mean, we all, I think, and that's why I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous today, even though I did drugs and alcohol. But I think that AA talks about that the bottom has been raised to reach whose ever is bottom is bottom. And I think that's what happened to me. But, the I think I hit multiple bottoms and you didn't even realize it, right?
Yep.
You would go on, I would get kicked out of restaurants eating with family friends. I would get like stop being served, cut off. And like, did I think about it? No, it was their fault that they were the asshole. But, and those are the signs that you're in denial and you don't see it and you don't want to see it, and, and I, God bless my wife at the time. It was like, you know, she either was in denial or she didn't know what to do. And, look, we had three young kids and we were building a family and I was still working. And like, at what point do you really hit bottom? And I'll never forget. And this is why I think anniversaries are so critical. We were in Disney World in Florida at a highfalutin hotel. And I had been on a run from Thanksgiving, and this was now February. And I was lying on the floor, 3 in the morning, everybody sleeping around me, and I was shaking and baking in my own skin. And I knew the gig was up right then and there. That was the moment. Call it moment of surrender, call it the grace of God, call it being sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I was scared, right? I didn't know where to turn and I was scared. And I got back to Boston and I actually had a physical. You talk about like fate and higher powers. I had a physical with my physician and he asked me how I was doing, and I dumped out a trash can bag full of nips and fists and prescription medication, and I just dumped it all out on the table. And I said, "This is how I'm doing. I need help." And I never saw my doctor sweat before or after that moment, but he got me into a rehab, and that was February 5th, 1998, and so started the journey. But, so yeah, do we recognize the basement door? Do we recognize the bottom? I don't think so, because I think that you know, th- 4 o'clock is the magic number. You can get, or I can get as screwed up as possible the night before. But by 4 o'clock the next day, I'm feeling my liver and looking in the mirror and going, I'm okay. So when does the insanity stop? And I think that's when the grace of God comes into one's life.
I mean, for like I said earlier, for me, I had a specific moment, a specific come to realization moment that I was going to die. I was either going to kill myself or something bad was going to happen. I couldn't continue to go on the way I was going on. So for me, it was a very specific moment, and it was a very obvious rock bottom. You know what I mean? Like I knew that this was it. And I think a lot of us struggle with those thoughts of like, hey, I might need to get help. But then the other that little evil guy that sits on your shoulder comes out and says, you're okay. You can keep going.
Yes.
One more day. One more day.
Yes.
Just don't drink today.
Four
And then you're
o'clock.
drinking by 6 o'clock. You know what I mean? Like, and then you're drinking on the way home, and you're drinking when you get home. Like it's insane. It's
Right.
literally, our body starts running the show, right? Like our addiction starts running the show, and our mind just sits back and goes, "Well, I guess I can't control this shit show anymore. I'm just going to sit here and watch. This is pretty fucking cool."
It
You know.
it's
So
true.
yeah,
It's
it's crazy what we'll do and what we're willing to deal with. And I think that's a very important point, is that we are willing to deal with everything the world throws at us, as long as we still have that substance available
no
and we're still
question.
willing to do whatever it takes to get that.
And the hiding and the lying and the cheating. I mean, it consumes so much of your life that you don't even realize you're lying. And then you're lying to your loved one. Like in my case, I'm lying to my wife constantly. And, when is it enough? When do you stop? And I'll tell you, you talked about, you wanted to commit suicide. Well, I was committing suicide slowly.
Yes.
And remember, I talked to you about getting those needles out of trash cans?
Hmm.
I never got AIDS, but I did get hepatitis C. And I had hepatitis C for many, many years. I was on 3 tours of duty on the Telapathare, interferon, ribavin, lost 48 pounds, weak as anything, but I was still doing drugs and I was still drinking, even though I was on it. I mean, how sick is that? Until finally, at the end, when I finally got sober and I was on the treatment another time, but this time the doctor said, "Look, I have good news and bad news. You can go on the treatment, but you now have liver cancer." And that uh, hepatitis C turned into liver cancer, and I needed a liver transplant. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here today. And my kid's sister was my donor because I had so many tumors in my liver that I couldn't be on a list or anything. I needed to have a donor that was a family member, and that's where it took me. You know, so I that was my liver transplant was 13 years ago in September, and
And you look like you're doing pretty well.
I didn't even like my sister. You know,
And apparently she loved you.
she did, and I like her now.
There, you better, or she's taking that shit back. That comes with a return policy. Um,
Hey, listen, if you're going to get liver cancer, if you're going to get cancer, liver's the best place. It's the only organ in your body that regenerates itself.
well, I know when I went to rehab, my liver was fine, but my kidneys were shit.
Ooh, baby.
Yeah, but I mean, that's crazy that you know. I mean, folks, the lesson here is don't do heroin. I mean, number one, and if you're gonna do it, don't be a dumbass like Tommy and take needles from a vet. I mean, it's not going to work out well for you. But the goal is not to do it at all. You
Right,
know.
right.
So you check into rehab. You're how old?
Geez, 39?
Okay, so 39 years old. You've lived a life. Now you're starting a new one. What was your treatment like? What was your rehabilitation journey like?
Not long enough. I did it my way. I should have stayed longer. I was in there 5, 6 days, and I wanted to leave because the drugs that they were giving me to wean me off of what I was on was getting me high. And I was like, I can't do this. And I got out in 5 days and I went to an outpatient program and I had an IOP. And so started the journey. I got myself into an AA meeting. I actually went to NA first and I couldn't relate. And I just kept searching, and I got connected into AA early on, and I stuck. And AA for me, there I was able to relate to people because, there was fathers, and they had businesses, and they had long-term sobriety. So I connected to that because I had all those things. I just didn't have long-term sobriety. And when I found I was in NA, I found it was a revolving door. There was never a lot of long time or clean time, they call it. And it just wasn't for me.
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed it, I dove into AA when I got back from my rehab, 100 meetings in 30 days. AA is an amazing program, but I see the same thing you do. And granted, I've gone to an NA meeting just to see what the difference was. And, I think now when you go to an AA meeting, I would say 50%, if not more, the people there are more than just alcoholics, but they tend to gravitate towards the alcoholic program because of the reasons you just stated. You have long-term sobriety, you have a mixture of the community, you have the white collar, you have the blue collar, you have the poverty stricken. It's a much more eclectic group of people. So there's a much, I don't want to say a wealth of knowledge, but I mean, I guess that maybe, yeah, that is the term. There's
Yeah,
a much better wealth of knowledge about life in general.
and not only that, AA has changed in respect. When I first walked in the program, there was smoking meetings, and the old timers in the day, if you could not mention drugs, and they would tell you to shut up. This is Alcoholic Anonymous. But over the years, a drug is a drug is a drug is a drug, period. And I think most of us have the disease of more, and it really doesn't matter what it is. And I think like over the years, AA has, I wouldn't say softened, but expanded its terminology and very accepting to, people are dual diagnosed, people have co-occurring mental illness, people have substance use disorder, whatever it might be, drugs, alcohol, and it's all accepted today. And I think AA is better for it. I think, you know, like we have to have an open mind, and some of the principles of the program, and that's where I think the foundation of, look, the only time you look down on an alcoholic is to extend your arm to raise it to help them back up again. That's it. There's no judgment. And I think that's very powerful. And that's, we're strangers who can reminisce. I mean, it's just like it's a fellowship of people who understand what you're going through. And I think that's why it works. I mean, it's worked for me for over 27 years. I go to 5, 6 meetings a week today.
Now, from our conversations that we've had leading up to today, you talked about all the things you do that are to help other people, to
100%.
to help the struggling and the suffering alcoholic. What are you doing now with this life you've been given? Talk about a little bit about the service work that you do.
Um, I facilitate a program called an AWOL. I do it every year. And an AWOL, it's actually an East Coast Boston term, and I don't think it's in many other places in the country, but an AWOL stands for a way of living or a way of life. And it's not sanctioned by AA, because there are rules, there are commitments, there's a facilitator, there's no group conscience. It's like, this is how we do it. You're either in or you're out. If you miss 2 meetings in a row, you're out. If you drink, you're out. If you miss 4 meetings total, you're out. It's 7 months, and we work the steps. Um, we have 10 to 12 people, all at different lengths of sobriety, and the journey of walking through the steps with different people at different levels of their journey makes the discussions so powerful. And we use the big book, we use the 12 and 12, we use the little red book, Sermon on the Mount, Drop the Rock, Buddha's version of the 12 steps. I mean, it's just really powerful. And I've taken thousands of people over the years through the steps. So that's a big service that I do every single year. And the only year I missed is when I had my liver transplant. But and then I sponsor people, and I work in the behavioral health field. So I am like, it's my life. That's really all I do.
If someone wanted to attend or be a part of this AWOL program, how would they find it?
You have to live in, it's in person. So,
Okay.
it's not online. You'd have to be in West Hollywood to, surrounding area to attend to it.
But is there like a website to go to register, or is there
Nothing,
any way to find more information on it?
nothing.
Okay.
No,
Okay.
no.
So contact Mr. Kaminsky.
Yeah. Contact LA Tommy K.
Yeah,
Yeah.
on TikTok. So that's pretty awesome. Like, I mean, that sounds like a really cool program. Is that like, so you say it's a 7-month program?
7 months. And we go through the steps, like one step every 2 to 3 weeks. We have assignments. Where you do a formal fourth and a formal fifth and an eighth and a ninth. And I mean, there's meditation and prayer. And I'll tell you something. So I've been doing it for 27 years, and it took me 26 years to find God. And it took me 25 years to understand what the meaning of being rocketed into the fourth dimension. You hear that term in the literature, the AA books, and I never knew what it was like. And the message to anybody listening out there, just to remain teachable. I don't know anything other than how to stay sober one day at a time. And I think doing the work, contrary action, being of service, I think all these things help us get out of ourselves. And I think the greatest thing is that we change by doing this work. You walk in a self centered, selfish, myopic individual, most likely a friggin' asshole. And today, I'm still an asshole. I just don't show it as much. And that's all from the work that, you know, I do on a daily basis.
Yeah. See, I'm a big proponent of AA. I'm a big believer in AA. Now, I'm not like you. I go when I need to go. Oh, here comes my dog. Oh, great.
What kind of dog you got?
An asshole, just like
Oh,
me. I have two rescues. Two rescues here. One's I think like they're both mutts. One's like 80 pounds. The other one's like 40 pounds. But the 80-pound one's a lunatic. I just built a fence in the backyard, so now they get to run around all day long, and
that's
they
cool.
still don't go to sleep. But yeah, like so I was saying, I'm a big proponent of AA, but I'm not the same as you in that I go regularly, but I don't go 5 times a week. I don't. I go now because I want to be there to spend time with the people that I met and strengthen the relationships I have. When I have a bad day, my first thing isn't to go to AA. My first thing is to talk to my wife. And then if that doesn't work, I call some of my friends, and if that doesn't work, I get to a meeting. But I put a lot more faith in my direct peer support network on a daily than I do AA, but I still try to follow the basic thing for AA is for me is, I don't have any power. I'm an asshole. Don't be a dickhead. If you're a dickhead, apologize to people. Check yourself every day and just try to live a better life by doing the next best thing and trying to help the next person you meet. It's if someone asked me to quote the 12 steps right now, I can't. I'm not gonna lie. But I think this is cool because it shows that everybody has their own way in recovery, right? Every recovery is personal. you know for you, you've chosen because it works for you. AA is the foundation. AA is the foundation for me, but it's also become this podcast and the other things that I do now to stay sober. But if it wasn't for AA, I never would have gotten to this point, because they're the ones that got me through. They're the ones that I went through the steps with. They're the ones that helped me realize the errors in my ways and my character flaws and the reasons why I was doing things, and not just saying, hey, I can be a bad person sometimes. Well, Mark, why are you a bad person sometimes? Why do you do the things you do? And I think that's, if I had to promote AA, I would say that when you get out of recovery and when we start this sober journey, we need to know who we are. And, we have two different personalities at minimum in our addiction. We have the one that everybody else sees, and we have the person that we truly are. And until we actually come to terms with who we truly are, we're never going to live sober and happy. So AA helps you find out who you are, because you're surrounded by that group of people that understand what you're going through and do not judge you when you say, I did this, I did that, I did this, I did that. Instead of judging, you're like, well, why'd you do it? What's the reason for what you're doing? Like, You become very self-aware in AA, and I think that's the key to sobriety. Honestly, is to be self-aware and know who you are as a person, so that you can gauge and check yourself when you start to get a little off center. My personal opinion. I mean, what do you think?
No, I think 100% agree with you, but I think there's two other elements that I think a sponsor is really critical if you're walking the journey of any 12-step program. My sponsor knows me better than my wife. And, like I tell him everything. And the funny thing about it is, I could be in tears. I could be so full with rage and anger and talk to him, and he laughs at me because he gets it. And I think that's such a key part of the program, that we get it. And the other piece is whatever it may be, but a higher power of your understanding, I think, is a critical thing. That it's just not me. I'm not one of these guys that like check in with God, or who I choose to call my higher power. I'm not checking in with my higher power every time I take a shit. I'm sorry. I just don't do it. Right. And I have this built in forgetter, but I also have that power and that strength to reach out and let go and give it up to a power greater than myself.
Hmm?
And I think that's central to not being so powerful. I mean, look at Rule 62. You know, don't take yourself too seriously. These are things that allow us to start to wear life as a loose garment and not get so pissed off. I would go to an A in Boston, all the AA meetings are in church basements. And the first thing that got me at my very first meeting was the laughter. I was walking down the stairs and I heard the laughter, and it really intrigued me. And I heard something at a meeting in New York City that I'll never forget, and it's so true. He said to me, "You're as sober as you drive." And it, like, I could be as serene as could be in an AA meeting and walk out, and somebody cuts me off, and the rage comes back in a New York minute. And it's like, how do you channel that? And I don't do it as often, but it still happens.
Yeah, I mean, I have a sponsor who I still talk to on a regular basis. We've become friends, you know. But maybe you can tell me something here. I've noticed that there's a difference in the recovery community in general from East Coast to West Coast. I've met a lot of people in Texas and in California and in Florida through the podcast and through social media. And, like, for example, there's a podcast down in Austin called the I Am Redemption podcast with Sean Livingston. And like they have these huge sober events like in parks and shit. Like everybody comes out and everybody celebrates sobriety. You try to do that in Pittsburgh, and they're going to look at you like you got a dick sticking out of your forehead. You know what I mean? Like they don't want, like, people in Pittsburgh don't want anybody to know that they're an alcoholic. Like I'm screaming it from the rooftops, right? And people look at me like I'm half retarded. It seems like there's a more AA is great, but I think once you get outside of AA, I think the recovery community in the East Coast is suffering. I think there's not that sense of community as much as there is in like the western part of the country.
Two things. I think one has to do with the weather, because especially out here in California, we have beach meetings all the time.
Mhm.
Other than COVID, and I was in Boston during COVID, we wound up moving in 2020 to LA. But for a year in Boston, we would have meetings outside, and it didn't matter. So let's light a fire, we'd put a circle, and we'd have meetings outside because we wanted meetings. Because I don't know if you kind of got into this, but Zoom meetings was a lifesaver when it first happened. But let me tell you something. For me, it got old real quick. And
Yeah, I need that
you,
physical connection. I need to be in
right.
front of somebody talking to them.
Totally. So like, I mean, if COVID happened like in March, by, the beginning of May, we had outdoor meetings and then we just rolled it in the winter and just never stopped. And, and then when I moved out to LA, LA, the thing that you said, I think is a bigger issue. I think I mentioned it to you when you and I chatted earlier. There's a movie called The Anonymous People, and
Mhm.
there are people in long-term sobriety that have jobs, do community service, do work in politics, all this stuff, and nobody knows that they're sober. And I think sobriety, especially today with the stigma that goes on, should be celebrated and let people know, because you know what? We're just human beings. We are not bad people trying to get good. We are sick people trying to get well. That's it.
And that's
And
what they tell you in AA.
right? And
They
that's
tell
the
you in AA.
truth. You've got a 12-step program that normies should have that just helps you become a better person. And what the hell is wrong with that?
I
We need
swear,
more of that.
I think you might have a son in Pittsburgh. I think you might have a son you didn't know about, because that's what I tell people all the time. I'm like, so I don't talk to my mother, right? Like we haven't talked in like 10 years, except for an occasional email here and there and whatnot. Um, and I didn't have, I don't, both my dads are dead, stepdad, real dad, they're all dead. Like I talked to my sister, that's it. Um, and that's another story. But one day I did an episode and I said, the 12 steps is something that we should use in our daily lives, even if you're not an addict, because it's just a way to be a better human, right?
Right.
It's a way to make better decisions. It's a way to treat people better. It's a way to live. And I'm not a very religious person. I go to church, but to live in the grace of God. I mean, you can't possibly piss off a God if you're doing good things. I mean, there's no way. Like if you're treating people with respect and you're making the next best decision, you're living in the best light you have. And my mother came back and sent me an email and was like, well, how would you apply the 12 steps to parenting? And I'm like, well, that's a loaded question because I'm not a parent. You know what I mean? And it makes me think like, I say that I believe that this program works in any atmosphere, but you being a parent, this is great because I finally get to ask this question from somebody who has experience. How do you exercise the 12 steps as a parent?
Oh man, I'm so glad you opened up this question, because the simple answer is I have a right to be wrong, and I can be open and honest with my kids. I don't have to be my way or the highway. AA has taught me how to listen and how to forgive and how to cry. I've cried in front of my kids, and the emotional connection, that the honesty and the vulnerability and the transparency makes for better young adults. I have three amazing kids, and my oldest daughter, who really didn't get my sobriety, she was probably 10 years old when I got sober, around there. But she has special needs. But my son was 8, and my youngest daughter, was probably 5, and he started asking me questions at some point about Mothers Against drugs, or whatever that mad thing is. And he had all these questions to ask me from a school report, and I kept answering them. And he said, well, like, what are you, an alcoholic? And I said, well, yeah. And like, so the question becomes, when do you tell your child that you're an alcoholic and that you can't do drugs and alcohol, or alcohol specifically? And I think that, like, as a parent, um, there's an openness and a dialogue that you don't have to be right, and it's okay. And I think it's a softer, gentler approach that has produced, and my wife is a saint, but it has produced three really confident, young, vivacious children. And to be honest with you, my son, who one of his buddies went off the rails, and he knew where to turn to. So I think that the there's no um, beating around the bush. There's a lot of transparency when you have a parent who's, you know, in the program, who's an alcoholic and in recovery. And I think they become better human beings because we don't have to be right. We don't have to be reprimanding. I've always approached it with a softer, gentler approach.
So let's take this a little bit deeper because I like this conversation. Imagine you're not an alcoholic and you're just normal Joe or normal Mary and you got kids and you're trying to utilize the 12 steps. How do you think that would look?
Ask my wife.
Refer to the expert. Bring her on.
I
Bring her on.
mean, let's just take it like there are individuals who have certain dispositions and personalities, and she happened to be in her profession is a vocational rehab counselor, so she understands people with issues. And I think between the two of us, she's a normie. She'll drink a couple of glasses of wine, not an issue. My kids drink. They all know they got dad to be the designated driver. But I think from a normie's perspective, I think when you live with somebody who's working a 12-step program, by osmosis, it becomes permeable within the household.
Mhm.
And the same with an active alcoholic. That affects families, period. We all know that. Families suffer from the disease, and that's why there's Al Anon. But with, like, somebody from afar, like a spouse who is with somebody in the program, I think, they hear what we talk about. And I think it's a very healthy, open environment that they utilize some of the tools of the program, especially when, I'm acting out. Maybe I think you need to get to a meeting tonight, Dad, or Tom, or whatever. And like they're aware. So I think it helps the whole family.
Yeah, yeah, there's your answer, Mom. So, you've talked a little bit about, where you were. You talked about where you are, and what you've done. Tell me the things that are going on in your life today that you would not have if it wasn't for your ability to know yourself and stay sober.
I don't have any enemies. I have no enemies. I am not in any adversarial positions with anybody on this planet. There is not one person, whether it's wherever it is, that I'm at odds with. And, that's a very peaceful, beautiful way to live. People like me today because, I don't know, I'm just calmer, gentler, softer. I don't need to be the life of the party. I don't need to have all the attention. I actually prefer to be in the background. And a really nice example is, I grew up in a hockey family. I played hockey my whole life. And when my kids were younger, I was their coach in Needham, Massachusetts. And I was still active at the time. And the leadership of the youth hockey organization, they did not want me around. They did not want me coaching. And if I was on the ice, they wanted to make sure other coaches were with me, that I wasn't like taking over the practice or the coach, anything. from that point to then getting sober, one guy I coached with for many, many years, after 3 years of me being sober, he looked at me and said, "You're different. You're quieter and gentler." And I wanted to tell him, "It's because I'm sober, you asshole." And I never said a word. But years later, I was voted Coach of the Year in Massachusetts. And that's only because of recovery. So I think that's really the message of where it leads you to today. That, look, when I first got to California and I would ride my bike around all the places, like, people don't drive good out here, and I would give them the finger. All right. I'm like 22 years sober and I'm giving people the finger because they won't let me cross the street. But I learned to give two fingers instead of one finger. And I get a very different reaction. And I think that that's continue to be able to look at yourself and do better. And like, that's where I am today. Like, how can, when I do a 9-step, my question to my kids, my partner, whoever, what can I do better? And I think that's what happens when you're working a 12-step program, that you have an awareness of your own actions. And I would feel guilty if, like, you said something earlier about God and light. I think that God is in one's heart. I think the love and the light that we get from a God um, can't coexist with anger, resentment, and fear. And I think that you hear the term blocking out the sunlight of the spirit. And I really believe that we feel it in our hearts, and we know intrinsically honesty and right from wrong, and what's good and what's not, and morality and moral codes and the love. And I think you get that from a higher power that is within inside of you. And that's where I am today. That's where it has left me or entered me. And why wouldn't I want more of that? It's just like, I think the alcoholic behavior is constantly wants more. I can't have one cookie. I can't have one lifesaver. I can't have one potato chip. I need more, 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 more. So I want the good stuff to come in, and I chase it like I chased, the drugs and alcohol. And that's where it's changed. And, like, yeah, it's okay today. And I have fears, financial insecurities. I'm no spring chicken anymore. I think I'm 50, but I act 50, but my wife says I act 12, but that's okay too. But like, what the heck, right? I mean, you come of age and you feel your mortality, and like, sure, who wants to grow up? I want to stay a little boy, period. Have fun, love life. And I think sobriety has given me that like, I mean, people ask me what I'm doing. I'm riding my bike, I'm playing tennis, I'm playing golf, I'm going hiking. I mean, I'm active and I'm working 50 hours a week. And I go to AA every day. So my life is full. And when we were drinking, just like the size of my problem, that was the size of my life. That small, isolated, drinking alone in my closet, in my basement. So that's where I am.
I can never let my wife watch this because I bitch when I come home after working 65 hours and I don't want to get up and go get lunch. I go back to sleep, and she's gonna look at this guy. He's out there playing tennis, hiking, running all over the place. He makes you look like you're 100 years old. Thank you very much, Tommy. You are fired. No. Listen, brother, I really appreciate getting to spend this hour with you. I think you're an amazing human being. I think you have such a wealth of knowledge that's going to help people. I always like to end this thing by asking my guests if there's something that the viewers or the listeners can take away from this. What would it be?
remain teachable. You know, we are gifted ones. We really are. And the journey is just beginning.
Well, I hope you have another 10,000 days, my friend. With that, folks, this is Mr. Tom Kaminsky from California, and you guys can check him out on TikTok under LA Tommy K. And hopefully we'll have him back on here to talk again. But just remember, folks, as Tommy said, remain teachable. We're only as good as our next best decision, and there's always a seat at the round table for you guys. I love everyone, and I hope to talk to you more down the road.
Thank you.
Next time.